there, and it's a good morning to everybody. We have a packed agenda for today, so let's just jump right in. The agenda will be in the chat. It'll be posted for you momentarily. We will, from this point moving forward, we will post the agenda on the GIA K-16 collaborative website by Thursday at noon. And we will continue to expand out the documents that are on the web page, on those web pages for you, so that all the documents that we're generating in these groups are available there. So there'll be a one-stop spot to go get your stuff. We held our initial kickoff meeting on January 28th after hearing that the state had actually was going to release this money. We introduced the importance of a regional collaborative with full representation from school districts, post-secondary institutions, employers, and community-based organizations. During the last 8 weeks, we've accomplished a lot. Each week, this core group of about 60 people who come and go during the meetings have come together to lay the groundwork for what a K-16 regional collaborative in the Inland Empire could look like. This is no easy task, not easy at all, in a region of this size and this scope. We've also identified key people and institutions that can be leaders in this work. We've identified the characteristics, qualities, and values needed in those leaders. We've also identified some key industry sectors that we can focus on moving forward. We have shared about the extensive pathway programs that currently exist in our region and are understanding many of the constraints they have. The purpose of this grant is to create, support, and expand these programs across the region. We got additional guidance a couple days ago that it's just not about creating new programs, but we can support existing programs. We've also learned about the required members of the steering committee. Next week, I'm meeting with many of those executive leaders who might serve on the steering committee. In order to prepare us for the grant, we're using the individuals of the GIA board to serve as the interim steering committee, with the expectation that additional members would be added to that group. I'll be sharing the names and the qualities you all provided to them next week. In the initial phase of the grant, we have the opportunity to expand that steering committee. I also am hoping to nail down the lead educational agency at that meeting. I will keep you all posted as soon as I know more. And that brings us today. The official RFP will be released next Friday. So the next piece of the puzzle we need to bring this together is to more fully understand the pathways and what are the key characteristics of successful programs and what are some of the constraints our programs and students face. So what does a program look like? Over the course of the last few years, I've been more and more exposed to these pathway programs throughout the region. You can go from Barstow and the Mountain Desert region to Temecula. You can go from Ontario through Coachella out to Palo Verde, and you will find these pathway programs in existence. Many of them begin in middle school, where students begin to get some exposure to some of the occupations that might be available to them in a lot of different ways. And then they transition from middle school into high school, and there they actually begin to experience a little more of those career ideas, right? They actually start taking they learn Spanish and in an engineering context in some cases. Students, when they leave high school, often leave with some sort of certificate that they can use to actually go out and get a job that pays above minimum wage for them. In many cases across the region, we have students taking courses that are college courses, dual enrollment, or other kinds of methods of getting some college credit for for programs, and they leave high school with these things. And in some cases, we have transitions that flow directly into a community college where students can continue to expand that work. Imagine a student graduating in Fontana with a particular certificate, then going on to Chaffey to continue that work, to get an AS degree or an AA degree in that space. But they're also working in the field because they have this certificate to be able to do that. Imagine that student then going to, either Cal State or to UC to continue the work that they are doing moving forward. That's what we need to imagine here, is how can we expand those programs and think about what are the constraints and limitations. There are also some key barriers experienced along each of these educational levels and transition points. Some of these are institutional, such as the lack of systems in place for dual enrollment or college credit for students. Others are that individuals may lack a college mindset due to family economic circumstances. There are other obstacles that we need to think about. So the purpose of today is to really kind of flesh out what those pathways look like and what are some of the affordances, the things that help students move along the path, and what are some of the barriers. So as we move into breakout rooms, we want to identify those key supports and barriers along the path for each of our sectors. Some of these will be the same across sectors, such as the need for advising in dual enrollment or college credit. Each sector also has key opportunities along the path, as well as barriers that are specific to the region and the sectors. If your group has time, there's also a third slide to begin identifying those elements that are needed to be in place in the institutions and businesses in order for a pathway to be successful. Like what is the communication across the educational institutions? What is the connection to the businesses? What resources and capacity need to be embedded within the businesses to support students? How do we begin to overcome some of the challenges of getting high school students into these career experiences? And we want to collect those to be able to aggregate them together, to use them as a tool to be able to identify what successful pathways look like, to identify key characteristics. So I think I have 3 minutes for some questions. Are there any questions? If you'd like to come off mute, maybe we have time for one.
So are we going to identify, Felix Marwan, Professor of Computer Information Systems at College of the Desert. The goal is to identify successful pathways that are already in existence and try to replicate that model, or see what fits, or just general discussion.
Great question, Felix. The idea is to go one step above that, is to think about, look at some of the programs that are in place that people know about, and then identifying the characteristics of those programs, right? So it's more at a programmatic level as opposed to individual situations. We already know that in some regions, the challenges students and programs face are very specific to regions. If you're in the Temecula Valley area, Southwest Riverside area, what you would, a lot of the programs there are very focused on connecting students to Cal State San Marcos through Mount San Jacinto Community College, and they have a biomedical focus in that space, and so for that region, they have some very special kinds of things with affordances, supports in place to be able to support that work. But our goal is to try to begin to identify what those key characteristics are, and then we will aggregate this knowledge together and share that with the group. So thank you for your question. Okay, I think we're ready.
So we have one hand up, and then let's, after that, cut it off and move, and we can come back to questions.
Rose.
Ruth has had hers up for a while.
Hi, good morning. As I think about our more mature pathways, where we've been working on dual enrollment and college articulated courses and that kind of thing, I think about apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship. Are we thinking that apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship might be able to be something that we can include in this?
I think that's a really great question, and I would hope you would bring that in your pathway discussion to bring into that space. Here, Rose, Lori, I'm going to take an extra minute. Sorry. You know what's amazing right now is how much money the state is throwing at this problem. I was just looking at Ben Sheeta's slide that I shared several weeks ago to this group. There are billions of dollars flowing out to the state to support all these kinds of work. I was in a meeting with the Learning Aligned Education program that the California Student Aid Commission is going to be administering this summer, and they have a lot of money going out to actually provide funding to students to do some work study like things that in some ways are similar to apprenticeship or internship programs, things like that. But there's just all of these buckets of money. When the RFP is released, I anticipate that this money is probably going to be some of the most flexible money. So being able to identify what are the pots of money what are the limitations of other pots of money and what this pot of money could be used for is going to be an important task. So bringing the idea of apprenticeship into this conversation, I think, is really, really important. So thank you for that, Rose. I appreciate that question. I think we're ready for the breakout rooms. There is a Jamboard that will be released in your breakout room chat. If it's not there, please send somebody back to the main room so we can get you situated. And I am going to stay back here, and I'll be willing to have conversations with anybody who would like to sit here and chat. So thank you all. So we're going to just do a little kind of recap of some of the things that you all learned in your breakout rooms. Beth, I'm going to go to you first. What were some of the things that you learned in the group there?
Oh, well, I discovered that we have an extremely prolific and advanced group. They were on Jamboard 3 while I was, talking on and about Jamboard 1, and it was really beautiful. So what we found, I think, in the first Jamboard is we have a ton of thoughts. We have more that could fit on the Jamboard screen, and so I think that we're going to need a way to be able to delve into each of the areas and expand it, because the amount of knowledge in this space was really rich. And I think it's going to be critical to the grant that we're able to point out the interstices, I think that's the right word, the gaps between middle school, high school, 2-year and 4-year. And in the next Jamboard, let's see, we had examples of pathways. We had pieces of pathways, and we had examples, but I think this is an area that we really want to pursue a lot more. People were very kind and also provided ways that we could contact them, because that local knowledge is critical, but we need to know who to contact about the local knowledge. So I think we're going to be able to do that. And then on the organizational elements, we had kind of attitudes, states of mind, ways of being, such as authentic, trusting, open, in addition to key conditions for success. And so I thought those were very wise as we go through this process. So it was outstanding discussion.
Right. Ida, what did your group discuss? What were some of the key learnings?
Well, we're in healthcare, so you can imagine those are deep and rich conversations there. We try to focus most in just kind of looking at the different entry points for the student journey and what could be seen across that journey to continue success. Some of the things that were identified were things that maybe we start in middle school are hard to continue to follow past high school because data sharing components, privacy components. So we talked a little bit about, how do we break down those barriers? Also, how do we continue to expose students to the things we know make pathways successful? Things like career exploration, right? Bringing it in at 7th to 8th grade, but then those plans that we help them build as early as 7th and 8th grade, how do they follow those students? And how do we teach them to build, adjust, and realign those career plans that they originally set? It was also shared that amongst the group, more and more conversation around the early career planning is important, and the earlier the better. So, maybe it's even earlier than 7th and 8th grade, right? But definitely an area to focus on.
Did you also see some of those contacts of that local knowledge in your
Yeah, we did that last week. So we were able to get a rich setup in our board for who needs to be in the room and the wisdom across healthcare for the week. So we were able to get that last week.
Yeah. Is there anything specialized in healthcare that folks needed to pay attention to?
One of the new things that came up is risk around placement. And that's a big one, right? Because we know it's just as important to place our students, not just to get them into the pathways. I thought that was an interesting one that came up today is a lot of our programs are having to take on risk that, it's even harder for them with funding allocation because the districts and the high schools and the employers do not want to take the risk of the placement for under 18-year-old students. And so I thought that was a very important component because we know industry is critical in the pathway being successful. So something
Right.
to look at a little bit closer.
Yeah.
You froze up, Carlos.
Engler? Ah. Hello?
We can hear you.
There we
Okay.
go.
Michael, can you please present next? And if I fade off, then Jackie, you can close for us.
Sure thing. So engineering and computing, there are already a lot of established pathways, and those are identified in the Jamboard with links to specific programs that are already in place. There was a lot of input about the really important components of the transitions between K-12 and the community colleges and the 4-year, and really really an emphasis on making sure that those connections are solid and that things like dual enrollment, articulation agreements, 2+2+2 articulations from the high schools to the 4-year colleges, making sure that the business community, that industry is at the table, even beyond just your basic meetings, but they're actively engaged in these pathways and really serving as an advisory role the way they're intended. I want to actually open it up to anybody else in the group who wants to chime in about any of the things that were put in the Jamboard. Anything in particular that stands out that you want to call out right now?
Yeah, I want to mention while we were talking about the barriers, California community colleges, I know that we're losing young Hispanic men at an alarming rate, and it's not just us. So cybersecurity, IT, that's very appealing to that demographic. So in a way, it's a tool to make change and eliminate barriers.
Great, thanks, Felix. Anybody else in the group?
Michael, I think one of the things I posted on there as a barrier that I often see when we're trying to articulate and develop these pathways is that we oftentimes don't have what I'm calling coaches, ed advisors to guide students from one system to another. One of the most successful things we've done at Norco is tightening that up with foster youth, going from high school to community college to 4-year. And when we put a lot of resources into training people that work together to move students from one system to the next and helping them with that process, our numbers just shot up, in terms of that successful transition. And so I think with this grant, we have a great opportunity as a region to figure out how do we do that better through training, possibly, I don't know, introducing new positions, something along those lines. But when we have clearly articulated agreements beyond the traditional, associate degrees of transfer and, transfer requirements, when we come up with targeted transfer pathways with people that are trained to help with those transitions, I think that's when we're going to really start making some significant impact, in the Inland Empire. And how we do that successfully as a large group like this, I think it's a huge challenge, but I think it's also a great opportunity that we really need to think about.
Yeah, thanks, Gustavo. That counseling, advising, the support piece is so important for the success of these pathways.
Yes.
Anyone else in the group real quick?
Well, can I just say, Gustavo, you touched actually on the weakest link in terms of line of sight. Okay, and we can say K through 16, so that at every handover, you know exactly where they have been, where they are, and where they want to go. So we always look at as is, and then where they want to go. But the weakest link is not knowing as when. And that's extremely, extremely important in the huge opportunity to make sure that, we tie in, throughout to the job place. Okay. And then every stakeholder should be, hands on deck. And we are saying the business community also should have that line of sight in terms of talent hunting, talent sourcing, talent onboarding, and talent placement.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Well, let's turn it over to the business group now. Jackie.
Okay, so I just jammed up the Jamboards with all of our Post-its. Our Jamboard was view only, but we just went into a Google Doc and started recording. So now all of those are blue Post-its. They say biz on top, so you know which ones are coming from us. We talked about some of the pain points in the pipeline. We talked about businesses wanting more of like short-term commitments, maybe not long-term internships. That's been difficult for them. That's been the feedback. So folks over at the chamber in Chino Valley were saying that businesses really like a job shadowing or a day kind of a program, so we can start to look at opportunities like that. And then on the other side of that coin is, internships are hard and they take a lot of time, but we do need to get businesses to commit to them because that is their commitment to the next generation. So we can't sort of like throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do have to, bring them into these systems and share the value of how important it is to expose our students. We talked about transportation being a barrier for students. We talked about how the academic system is really outdated. It's still in the Industrial Revolution. It's still very much a product of the Industrial Revolution versus integrating seamless technology, like we have today. We talked about how the systems are very segregated, how there's not a way to sort of, for outsiders, especially, business CBOs to sort of come in and everybody work together seamlessly. So we talked about having a pilot program to desegregate the system and integrate the systems. We also talked a lot about student voice and how, James over at Redlands said, students were depressed and we brought in that mental health piece. Now they're just really pissed. They're really upset that they weren't part of decision making, that all of these decisions happened, especially in the COVID era, without them. And one student I spoke to recently told me, she goes, there was just no humanity in it. There's no humanity, and they're very upset with some of these systems. So as we build our systems, we need to start thinking about how we're bringing them in. We talked about burnout in the small business community. This is huge. we talk about student mental health, but there's also a mental health piece with the businesses, especially small businesses. Not only are they dealing with a workforce issue, but the workforce that they do have, they're burnt out. And I'd like to make that an extension to us as well. I was just at a workshop and a retreat with my peers, and we talked a lot about how, and we took a moment to just talk about how difficult it was to work in the pandemic. And we listened to shared stories about that. Staff in education system, they're feeling burnt out as well. We talked about the retirements that are coming up and how that's going to be a barrier. And we talked about the lack of succession planning, how if you have a really great program, especially in CTE, if that teacher leaves, then usually that program dies. So how do we get around, and support these really great programs and make sure that they're not, going away when the great person that runs it goes away. We also talked about data and privacy, and lastly, I'll say that certifications they take too long. So we talked about using programs like dual enrollment and blending certain techniques, starting with non-credit, so that can grow into a new program. We have homework because we didn't get to examples of successful pathways. So we opened it up to folks to add that to the Jamboard, and maybe that's our homework. I know Carlos is a teacher at heart and he likes to assign homework. So maybe that's our homework. I'm not quite sure if the other groups got to what are the successful pathways out there. So that's our report for business.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. A lot of interesting conversations and a lot of synergy and connection with some of the other groups. Thank you very much, and thank your group. The Jamboards, they will remain open. You can continue adding them. So if you didn't finish your class assignment, you can do it for homework. Or if you want to go back and revisit it and see that information put in there, we will make sure that the Jamboard links are available at the website where we're putting the meeting agenda and those things in place there. For next week, we anticipate there will be the release of the RFP. I place my bet at 8 p.m. on Friday. And I think, and so at our meeting next week, we hope to present some data about what are some of the critical jobs needed in our region. I'm hoping, Jackie, that you can talk to us about sectors and clusters, and maybe we can understand that and understand how that leads to economic development, how decisions we make in this group will impact economic development in the region. And I'm hoping that Mr. Wahafi can talk a little bit about the recovery with equity targets that we also need to hit in this grant. So a lot going on. We're racing to the finish here, and it is a pleasure to be able to work with all of you. And we'll see you next week.